growing up, had you a shed type scenario like this? Not like this, but like in your home place?
Oh yeah, we had sheds, but workshops and things like that. Yeah, my father was always into all kinds of mechanical stuff and all that. You know, I think pretty much everyone did like in those days. I think it was the decline of the tech when you were going on to secondary school. The question was, were you going to go to the tech, or in our case, were you going to go to Mary O's? That was the more academic thing. But the tech, once that's kind of died out, doesn't it? I don't know if it's still around, are they? Technical school.
Well, there was the tech in Tuam. Tuam was interesting from an ecclesiastical point of view because you had a boarding school for the boys in St. Jarlath's, 2 boarding schools for the girls in the Pres and the Mercy.
Right.
You had the Christian Brothers, but you also had the tech.
Yeah.
And the tech was where, if you kind of knew early you weren't academic, you went to the tech.
Isn't that a kind of a polite way of putting it? Because I remember, we were in a place called Mary O's, which is kind of a secondary school for boys, which she started herself, this one, Mary O'Flanagan. But we were straight across from the tech. There were certain classes that we went over for, maybe twice or 3 times a week, for mechanical drawing and woodwork, for example. So we did a bit of that. But that kind of died out. I think in a way that's kind of been one of the great undoings of Ireland and maybe of the world in general, the West in general, where boys stop learning practical things.
Yeah.
Because, when we were kids, I mean, my father, I spent a lot of my childhood in places like this, listening to my father and some fella who'd be, he'd be maybe a mechanic or a saddler or something like that. And they'd be talking for literally hours when they had time.
Oh yeah, like my dad would have loved welding now and building cattle troughs and feeders. So it'd nearly be like going to mass kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Out here pottering, having ideas. It wouldn't be necessarily the manual skill that he was an expert in, but it was like a hobby that was practical.
It's a challenge. 'Cause I remember my father built a wheelbarrow, really big for the bog, but it wasn't like a thrown together thing. It was beautifully carved, and even the wheel it was all wood, including the wheel. Like, he built the wheel out of wood, and it was really the way he operated. Like, they were really great men, because they could actually. They knew all about this stuff. They learned it all themselves, and once they knew about mechanics or whatever, carpentry or plumbing, whatever it was, they were able to take the knowledge from that and somehow translate it into political knowledge or financial, economic knowledge. There was something they could actually translate it into a different way of thinking, that it was about the world was put together in a certain way, mechanically or whatever. And that's kind of gone, where everything is now abstracted. Everything is out of theory and books and papers.
You get into these flows of serendipitous things happen.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, I met a man, and on one level, I was meeting him for a particular reason, and he gives me a book, and the book was about the greatest philosopher ever. And I opened the book last night, and because I was thinking about today, and what we might talk about or whatever. The greatest philosopher ever. This book was about Mary, the Virgin Mary, and Mother of God. And then the next paragraph mentions a C.S. Lewis essay that's called Meditations in a Tool Shed. And I'm thinking, right, we're going to be in a tool shed tomorrow. Yeah. In a kind of a way, what we're talking about was a kind of meditation practice, if you like, those manual skills in terms of integrating what they were doing, but also with the outer world.
That's amazing, because there's this American philosopher, Matthew Brigg Crawford. He's a philosopher and a motorcycle mechanic. And he talks about places like this, where men congregate or men work and come and visit and talk or get jobs done one to the other and so on. And he actually says that these places were the only existence ever of an actual republic. That you had men who were in control of their own skills and of their own livelihoods and of their own destinies in a certain way. and they were talking about the world and how it was put together and how it could be improved, and that was an emblem and a kind of a miniature of the Republic that everybody wanted to create, or that we should be aiming to create in our countries, and never did. And it's a really interesting insight. He's an incredible guy, actually, amazing sort of insights into the connection between working with your hands and thinking. He's written several books about it. The last one was called Why We Drive, which is about cars, and it's amazing, very interesting book. But when we were in school, I remember that time back in the 70s, when, that's why I kind of said jokingly to you earlier, wasn't that a euphemism, when you were saying about how they were the less academic, because the idea was that they were the dimmest. That kind of apartheid was created based on kind of book learning, that if you were academically smart, that made you more intelligent. But actually, what we learned I think, in the whole COVID episode, was that actually wasn't true at all, because it was all the book learners that got caught offside with the COVID scam, and all the guys who knew how to make and fix things saw through it instantly, or not mostly.
Yeah, and it's that kind of prioritization that there's only one type of intelligence.
Yeah.
But there aren't many types.
Yeah.
And even what you're saying there about these places as being the only republics, it's like these places where you have the tools to create your own world, put together the world in a real sense.
Yeah.
Modern life has taken away those tools in a certain sense, metaphorically, but also literally. That gathering to make things for just your own personal world. It's not, You're not trying to make something so you can send 10 billion of them on eBay.
No. My best friend, going back to when I was this high, two of us were in high infants class. We met up, a fellow called Jerry from back home, and he's still down there, and he became a joiner after his father, and he has a workshop down there, and he makes doors and everything. He can make anything, fireplaces, you name it. Great craftsman. But every Friday in that workshop, all the men, similar type men, again, the Republic, they congregate in his workshop, and they'll have mugs of tea or coffee or whatever, and they'll talk about the world and their lives and what's going on. And so there's something going on in that people aren't aware. And you get it now in a kind of a slightly kind of, I think, manufactured sense, the men in sheds movement, which is good, but it's kind of artificial in a way.
But the minute, I remember the first one of them I came across was actually in Claremorris when I used to have a shop down there. And I thought, it's a genius idea. But the minute the genius takes off, the state comes in to put a box around it.
Yeah, that's
to replicate it. And maybe, I don't know if they're funded now or not, but so suddenly the very reason you went in there so you could just freely express yourself is now
controlled. It's controlled, invisibly controlled, because it's next thing there's a whisper. Well, your man there now, Waters, I heard a few things that he was saying, and it might endanger your funding now, Jerry, that kind of thing. And that's what they're doing with everything. They did it with the arts. They did it with anything they put their dead hand on, they kill it. I have a friend in a west of Ireland town whose whole thing is he helps addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts and all that, and he's really good at it. He's been trying for years to get state support just to keep the thing going, and give it a kind, because he can help people, he really does help, particularly young men, His methods are unorthodox. You see, this is the problem. Once the state becomes involved, because when you're doing that kind of work, you basically need to be able to give a fella a kick in the arse, not necessarily metaphorically, right? And you can't do that when the state is looking at you.
Well, that's a very good segue into Conor McGregor.
It is actually, yeah.
Because when I started to write first, I started writing about boxing and mixed martial arts. For the very reason was nobody I know is going to ever read this kind of thing. But that brought me into a world, and the way I framed it to myself at the time, and why I was interested in it was almost a counterculture world, this mixed martial arts world, to the GAA world, which I could sense was becoming over-corporatized, almost too celebrated, and was losing something, and at the same time wasn't speaking to this. There was this emerging cohort of young men and women that were gathering in gyms that were not unlike this shed in terms of facilities, but were dedicating themselves like 4 and 5 times a week to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to train in this sport that no one was ever going to watch at the time. And McGregor was the highest version of success in that world at that time.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see now today, fast forward through that career path he took, where he is now. Like, he's suddenly part of the political conversation.
Yeah, I was intrigued when Martin was in the White House with Trump that time on the 12th of March, markedly. And somebody asked Trump, who's your favourite Irish person? And he kind of, I thought, was kind of pretending not to be able to remember his name or something. Because he said, oh, you're a fighter. And somebody said, Conor McGregor. Conor, yeah. And then he said to Martin, your father was a fighter, yeah? He said, oh, yeah. He says, yeah. And look at you. You're so smooth and handsome.
Yeah.
But the word fighter has all kinds of resonances here.
Yeah.
Because then a week later, or less, 5 days later, McGregor himself is in the White House speaking on Trump's ground, speaking his message, obviously with the blessing of the president.
When we spoke the last time we were chatting, we kind of felt something, he had some sort of a trick card he was going to play, because we spoke, I think, on the 13th, and it was before the 17th. He left the crumb there for everybody to say, I knew exactly what I was doing when I brought up his name, and I gave you the opportunity
to denounce him.
And you didn't.
And you never did. So stop now. If you go back to the assassination attempt last year, what was when he got up? What were the words he said? Fight.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole series of connections here. And because it seems to me that he was looking for somebody. He didn't gratuitously pick Conor McGregor to do that. There was a thinking process behind that.
Oh yeah, there was, absolutely.
And one of the things I see about this, now I mean, we can have all kinds of caveats about Trump and all that and blah, blah, blah. And some things we don't know exactly what's going on, or we don't know at all what's going on.
Or there's an outer layer that we're not aware.
Yeah. We don't know how much control he has of what he's doing necessarily. But at the same time, we see these patterns. And one of the things we can see is very clearly that Trump and Vance increasingly, and Musk, seem increasingly to be watchful about what's happening in the wider Western world. In terms, they're kind of looking askance at the slippage of free speech, the increasing tyrannical tenor to a lot of what's going on. And they're saying, hang on a minute, what's the story, lads? This is the free world. What happened to the free world, And that's very interesting and very positive. Because, I mean, we've been talking about that, Jerry, for 5 years. and nobody else seemed to be, even in Ireland, nobody's even aware there's an issue. That they've actually come in at the dead of night and stolen our constitution away, our freedoms away, and our rights away, and give them back to us as concessions if we're good.
Yeah.
If we behave ourselves by their criteria. That's the deal. People are not aware of that. This is something that I found, I remember actually years ago becoming aware of this as a thing in family law, where fathers were being denied all legal rights, but then they were being given something that looked something similar, but it was a concession. You can take your child to McDonald's on a Sunday for an hour and a half. There, who said you didn't have rights? So this is a new world that is being constructed underneath us. And this goes to your bigger thing. Like, where does Trump fit into this, thinking-wise? This is something that I'm puzzled by. Because his instincts always seem to be right. And yet some of the optics are not necessarily supportive of that all the time. Now, I don't know. I wrote an article during the week about this. The whole idea that there's this kind of subtext now emerging in America of like a move towards something close to monarchy, or that there's a sense in which, and lots of different people are saying this, and not necessarily all with any kind of malign motives, but they're actually saying democracy doesn't work anymore. It stopped working. Now, they're talking about a particular kind of democracy which is corrupted in all kinds of ways. By party system, by corrupt media and so on. So you can't have democracy in those conditions anyway, really. But I think it's interesting now that, there's certain strands in what Trump and Vance are saying, and Musk. Musk actually more than either of them, actually. He's been hammering this very hard. He understands that there's no democracy without conversation, without a free and open conversation. And I've been saying that for years. The first and most important thing is conversation. And what have the media been doing for the last 5 years? Been destroying all opportunities of conversation. You can only have one-sided conversations, what they want to tell the people.
We'll say on the tariffs that came in, Trump introduced a couple of days ago. And the media's initial framework of the tariff conversation was across the board to point out the fact he was holding this silly sign.
Oh, yeah.
With all the countries' names on it. And this was indicative of the fact he was a lunatic, or he didn't know what he was doing. So that all other conversation is unnecessary about this.
Yeah.
Because of this.
Let's pick on one little detail that makes him look like a clown.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to make any argument about what he's actually talking about.
And I think my sense just going around, especially over the last month, is that people are not willing to tolerate that level of conversation anymore. And these would be people that would listen to me and run out the door, but they want to listen to something that has some level of more depth.
You see, this is an interesting thing, Jerry. It's really interesting, this, because Trump is such an unorthodox person. He's constantly chipping away at norms of speech, what people expect for a politician, the kind of lingo of that politician. He doesn't do that. He kind of does a kind of a strange kind of a mix where he repeats things, or he finishes off with something which is like a punchline, which changes the whole colour of everything. Like I remember way back when in the first presidency, when he was in the very first few months, he brought in some kind of a tax cut. I can't remember the details, but it was going to benefit working families and so on. And he was describing this in a broadcast or a speech or something, and he was saying about what he was doing, and then he was kind of, these people will get it, and then he stopped and he says, they're going to be so happy. Suddenly you see the family gathered around the Christmas dinner table with their crackers, and the table is creaking with food. And so he's doing this kind of stuff all the time. And then you see what happened there in that situation with that placard. He explained it. We had a bigger one, we had a proper one, but it got too windy, so we couldn't take it. Now, anybody with a heart and a soul knows that this kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, and it happens, and that is actually the standard practice, because if you actually spend time watching the House of Representatives or the Senate, when they get their speaking time, they're always doing this using visual aids in a way that we never see done in like Europe, the UK or Ireland.
Yeah.
So what he did wasn't out of step with anything that happens in the other kind of houses of Parliament or state in the United States.
Anybody who's ever been to a wedding and listened to best man speeches or something and the guy's, and he's lost a page or something, and there's like, but he gets over it and everybody laughs and it's fine. Yeah. There's no reason why politics can't be done like that as well. Yeah. It doesn't have to be formalised. But this is the nonsense that they zero in on, and some people are taken in by that, but not as many as there used to be.
Well, I think people are because of the inescapable impact, we'll say this tariffs regime could have on people, if it is a long-term strategy, or I suspect it isn't, but it's some sort of game of chess that's beginning to be played out for a specific goal in the end. But people, I think, are beginning to recognize, hold on now a second, I need to know what's happening here because this is going to affect me. So you saying, look at this foolish placard, this guy's dangerous. Well, I still need to know what's happening.
Yeah. Can you tell me what the story is? Yeah. It's like, I remember somebody once said, about in journalism, this concept of colour writing. I think it was Gene Kerrigan. And he was saying about colour writing. And he was saying, when you go to the St. Patrick's Day parade to write about it, and you're the colour writer, he said, the colour is not a dog pissing against a lamppost. The colour is the parade. And it's the same thing with the Trump thing. The story is what he's saying. It's not what kind of sign he's showing or what happened or how, this is the nonsense. But you see, at the back of that is just a profound prejudice which has had a particular kind of an ideological drive behind it for the last 10 years. The thing is now, that ideological drive is losing steam because there's no alternative now. The Democratic Party is in ribbons and doesn't show any signs of making a comeback. That's a big deal because it goes to a lot of what's gone on in Ireland, in relation to what's happened in Ireland in the last 15 years or so, since the economic collapse. And also it has to do with this tariffs thing, because our government has made the mistake of backing the wrong horse. That democratic influence is still at play in Ireland, but it's going to die out because it's going to run out of money and they'll be gone in 6 months. That's my hunch. They're here and they're interfering in everything, they're running everything, they're dictating policy, they're running psyops, they're telling government they're advising them and so on. That'll be gone and they're going to have to deal with this guy Trump. And they're not making a very good fist of it. Now, I was very disappointed actually in the tariffs thing that he announced, because I wanted him to actually tell the pharmaceuticals, come back or you're done. Because we don't need them. We need rid of those people in order to get our country back.
You need to examine what he's doing, because when he does something that's a danger to the country, which I would have framed as in this
You got the story next morning. I mean, you had the story within hours, which nobody else that I know of. I don't read the mainstream, but I think if somebody else had got it, it would be a talking point now, because this is the key point. People won't necessarily agree with me that we want shot of the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe in time they will. Because when they see the damage that these people have done to our country and the way that they've changed the culture of it so completely and the political configuration of the country and so on. And I found even people who would normally be on our side were talking about, a soft landing, hoping for a soft landing. No, I wasn't hoping for a soft landing because, you see, it seems to me, the way I would put it is say to people, look, you kind of have a choice insofar as you have. But the choice is something like, which would you prefer? Your children to continue having these cushy jobs, or your grandchildren actually having a country to live in.
I remember maybe 2 years ago writing about like people in their 40s, 50s and 60s are kind of the protectors of the nation before it's handed over to the youth of the nation, in a sense. Because, when we're in our 20s and 30s, and maybe it's even 40s now, is that, you make your mistakes, you get on the wrong tracks, you've had your experiences, and hopefully you get to a point where you've learned from some of them, and you're in a better state to say, well, don't just sprint down that direction. There could be a cliff on the side of the road there. So that it seems to me, or if I was to look at my age cohort, is that we abdicated that responsibility to kind of take your time there, or have you thought of everything here?
Yeah.
Whereas our political class are like, oh yeah, we're doing this. We're taking in unlimited numbers of refugees because we're all great people.
And that's the cover story.
And that's the cover story.
Yeah.
And you can't ask about any cover story without being labelled something or other. When in fact you're trying, if you want to get the essence of what that conversation is doing, is you're trying to protect what's important here. And are you thinking about what's important here?
Well, you see, one of the things that this whole model of economy did to Ireland was it changed entirely the nature of the kind of people who were drawn into politics.
Yeah.
We got cretins as a result of the FDI policy. Let's not put a tooth in it. We got cretins who don't know anything but are good at taking messages and carrying out orders, right? And that's all that is required of you in that job. If you have a brain and you want to run a country by its own lights, then you're not going to do that. You're not going to want to do that. You don't want corporations coming into your country and telling you what to do, what they want. You want to run an economy that is an Irish economy. And okay, have other elements from outside coming in, but they're not to be the primary element of it. But that was the very interesting thing about your article the other day, which really, I read it early in the morning. As soon as you put it up, I think it came straight through. Because I hadn't thought about this particular point. When I the night before, I heard about the tariffs, and I saw the UK tariff at 10% and then the EU tariff at 20%, and it never occurred to me what you said. And it's so, the implications of this are enormous now, in conjunction with the fact that the pharmaceuticals are remaining for the time being. However long that is, hopefully not long. But because here now, you see, the important thing is this corporate transnational element, the FDI element of the economy, should never have been anything other than a booster rocket. That it would get us into the stratosphere, and then we're on our own, and then we get rid of it. It burns up, and then it goes. We don't care. Because now we have a proper economy, a function for the first time in history, an Irish economy for an Irish population. But you see, now the danger is that if we have the worst of both worlds, because as you said, the differential between the tariffs for the UK and Ireland create a huge problem now, which is that there's now an incentive for indigenous industries to go up across the border and operate from there. That's going to be radical in terms of undermining our capacity to build a real indigenous economy. I don't know, was he actually thinking to spare us the pain of losing the pharmaceuticals, but he's actually inflicted far more pain on us in this way.
Here's a reveal as that when it comes down to it, is it you as in America or me in Ireland? He doesn't give a fuck, because he probably doesn't even realize the impact of what he's done is on the local mechanics of a country. So that just shows you he doesn't care. It doesn't reveal anything about whether he's a good politician or bad. He cares about his own country. Like, I'm not saying he doesn't have greater cares about the world, but what I'm saying is that's the responsibility is on us to have, like the nation of Ireland, is to have our own responsibility to protect it.
But you see, Jerry, this is one of the symptoms of what's been going on for the last 15 years or so, which is that, and I noticed this again in all kinds of areas. I remember, for example, back in Notre Dame University, hearing a particular very, very venerable and famous professor talking about the Irish referendum. And I was listening to it, and he was talking utter shite. And I recognised where the shite came from. It came from the Irish Times, right? And this is a guy who wouldn't be thinking like that normally at all. But this is his version of what happened, right? Because of the unseen, unacknowledged censorship that exists in Ireland, the chilling aspect of the cancellation culture and the tyranny of, LGBT and Antifa and all that, those kind of, which are not taken seriously because most people don't know about them. Like, people don't know that that it's impossible for some people to hold political meetings in Ireland because Antifa will turn up or will ring up the hotel and terrify them, or hack into their wedding fixtures and then ring all the people who are going to have weddings and get them to cancel their weddings. This is going on. I've been hearing these stories for the last 5 years. So the problem is then that there's no voice coming out of Ireland of sanity. So that people like Donald Trump are completely blindsided with regard to what's really happening. Because if he knew what was really happening in Ireland, he would be here in Doonbeg. He would live there for the next 6 months, and he would sort it out.
His attitude is, Doonbeg's a nice property. I like it. But there's no he's no emotional attachment to it other than, that's a nice piece of property. I'd like to own that.
Yeah, because he even said to Starmer there in that first meeting they had about, I have a property here in the UK. No, okay. But we'll forgive him in a certain sense. But and again, you see, if he talks to McGregor, I'm sorry to say, McGregor doesn't know either.
Well, you see, the problem, you might frame that problem as, and we'll bring in Enoch Burke here for a second as well, along with me, Conor McGregor, is what you might say is, if Trump is looking at Ireland as a sort of, that's one of the nicer properties that's around the world, and I'll be disposed to them if I can find somebody that is disposed to me in the ways that are important to me. So he's, in a sense, you look at Ireland, and because the middle ground has collapsed silently, without saying they're abdicating their responsibilities, and you're left with two characters that are on the margins. And I'm not saying good or bad, I'm saying, so you have Conor McGregor here, and you have someone like Enoch Burke here. Now they're talking very good
Yeah.
on particular strands of thought.
Yes.
But if we open up the full picture,
Yeah.
we
That's the
mightn't
problem.
like everything. We definitely won't like everything.
And they
we
don't
see.
have an interest in the full picture.
And they don't have
Like, you know, I'm with the best will. It's not necessarily a criticism, but I mean, for example, take McGregor. I mean, he came out in favour of the lockdowns in a quite extraordinary way. He did a broadcast where he was basically ranting, demanding more and greater lockdowns at an early stage. And I think similar thing about the vaccine, if I'm not mistaken.
Pascal Donoghue
Yeah.
reached out personally in the panic of the pandemic, the first week in that March week, was reaching out personally. The politicians were reaching out personally to people to try and get a message across, get funding, because there was the panic of, we don't have enough of this. We need ventilators of all things, imagine. And we need all this stuff.
We're not killing enough people, come on.
So-
get the ventilators out.
So he reaches out to Conor McGregor. McGregor helps them do it. 5 years removed, that's being used as a point against him.
Yeah.
But all I'd say is, that's just a guy that didn't know what was going on.
I completely get that, by the way. And I'm not saying it in any way to kind of say,
yeah.
No, I'm saying it purely on the basis that we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
We all miss things. It's a gradual osmotic process of growth and learning. And none of us can claim to be complete authorities on anything in this that's relevant to this. Like another thing that Conor McGregor doesn't seem to understand is the limitations of the presidency, because he's saying things that he will do when he's president, dragging all the culprits into court and prosecuting. You can't do that as president. You have no power as president other than to slow down certain bills by calling in the Council of State and then referring it, if they'll agree, to the Supreme Court. That'll probably delay a bill by maybe 3 months. That's about the height of your powers. And we saw that in the past. You know, when somebody did actually stand up, Carol O'Donnell back in the 70s, he was gone. He had to resign. And so that's what happens. If you're really an independent person as president, you last a wet week if you're lucky.
Absolutely. And so this is where we take a different track, or I do anyway, with the media, who try to present Trump's framing of things as buffoonery. Oh, he's associated with Conor McGregor. And whereas I look at Trump and I'm thinking, well, he's found a tool to use. And a bit like the tariffs, he doesn't really give a fuck what happens to Conor McGregor after the fact.
Oh no, and he can do a lot of good.
And he can do a lot of good, but he's not personally invested in the way he's not personally invested if this tariffs regime destroys the indigenous Irish industry.
I greatly welcomed his intervention for that reason, that he has allowed megaphone. And I saw one tweet of him speaking, and there was 68 million views on it. Like that's something.
They're frightened of his reach.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, and Trump knows that. Like Trump, you know, he has a different attitude to those kinds of things. You see, because the kind of PR mentality looks at a situation like that and thinks, well, there's upsides and downsides, and the way you do it, you subtract the downsides from the upsides and see if you have anything left, and then you go with that, right? Trump doesn't think like that because he knows. He adds the downsides to the upsides and says, that's the figure we want to look at, that because that's the reach, that's the impact. Because he knows there's nothing they're saying about Conor McGregor that's any worse than what they're saying about me. And I'm the President of the United States of America, so...
Yeah. And Conor's talking on the two particular topics I want him to talk about, which is the transgender stuff, but particularly the immigration stuff.
Yes.
Trump understands idolatry, and so does McGregor. There's a significant portion of Trump's electorate that idolize him. It's not about the politics. It's not about whatever. It's that intangible quality they just can't get enough of. He doesn't have it the way he had it maybe 6 years ago, but McGregor had that quality.
Yeah.
Specifically, young men. They were drawn to him. There was a cohort drawn to him like that.
Yeah, it's fearlessness.
Yeah.
It's with the way a child thinks of a father. You know, that daddy's going to protect us.
Yeah.
And Trump gives off that vibe. And so does McGregor in certain ways, not on all channels necessarily, but you know, enough sufficiently to actually communicate a certain degree of confidence and a certain degree of reassurance to people that, the cavalry's here. The cavalry's here now, we can relax a little bit. Something's going to happen. The scum are not getting away with everything now.
You wouldn't describe any of the two of them as spiritual people off the bat, right? But they seem to be supreme manifestors of their reality in making what they say come to be. Like McGregor, particularly in his early career, he wasn't just predicting fights, he was predicting minutes of rounds he was going to do things in. And for a while, nearly almost everything he projected out into the world came back to him until a certain point. I find both of them fascinating characters, just observing them as human beings. Because I think if any of that, what I just said is true, and maybe you might think it isn't, that you can positively manifest stuff, but you can also negatively manifest stuff. It's almost like that shadow aspect that everybody has.
Well, this is an interesting thing because actually what it's about is the solitary man, in each case, holding the line for himself. In other words, it's not like the modern notion of power, which is basically a gang of like-minded, you know, LGBT goons or BLM goons or Antifa goons or politicians who are just their own kind of Mickey Mouse goons, you know. This is a guy standing alone. It's the Clint Eastwood type figure out of the movies, that kind of figure. And that he has this capacity that people, you know, look up to, even if only unconsciously, because they recognize it as something they needed at some point, to know there was somebody there who was able to take charge and take control and give them the sense that I can rest now. But I saw a thing where Trump was asked in a question at a press conference recently. He says, well, somebody asked him a very interesting question. He says, are you ever afraid? And he gave the most remarkable answer, because normally you'd expect Trump to go into bravado. That's kind of the image that he kind of sometimes cultivates and that people project onto him. And he said, no, he says, no, if I was afraid I couldn't do my job. But it's like he had a choice about it, and he had decided not to be afraid because he needed to do this job. And it's a very interesting way of seeing things. It's not like, I'm not afraid of anything. No, I'm afraid, of course. And that's the whole definition of courage, is feel the fear and do it anyway. Robert Bly, the American poet, who wrote several books about men, he wrote a brilliant book called Iron John, about the man finding his wild man. And the wild man is, in broad lies, it's about getting in touch with your inner strength and your dignity as a man, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
No. It's like an integration thing.
He has another image which he uses as the savage man, which is the guy who's kind of like his definition of it is a savage man is somebody who seems to be a hard man, but was reared by women, and isn't. He's putting on it's bravado. It's an act, and I sometimes think that that's the distinction between Trump and McGregor. That McGregor has a certain immaturity about McGregor. He's still in the savage phase, and he needed to be to fight those to do what he did. But Trump is a wild man. He's not a savage man, because he's got a brain and he's got intelligence that very few people understand, the depth of that intelligence and the range of it, and what is going on there in a lot of what he's doing. It's got layer upon layer. So there's a certain sense in which Trump is taking McGregor, as it were, under his wing. And he's his protege for Ireland. And he sees a potential there.
What should Ireland think about that?
I personally would be hopeful about it. I would be hopeful anyway. I don't know about optimistic. I mean, McGregor, he's an intelligent guy, and he's an able guy. He's got a lot of courage and a lot of bottle and a lot of, spirit. He needs to find out a lot of stuff yet about Ireland and how it works and all that kind of stuff. But that's easy.
I'm more worried about the shadow element of him. as in the integration of it.
Yes.
That's not a question I have an answer to. Like, as in, I could be worrying about something that isn't actually something to worry about because I don't know. So the culmination of the positive manifestations of Conor McGregor brought him to a place where he has this fight with Floyd Mayweather, you know, the greatest defensive boxer in history. And they have this fallacy of a fight that makes both men rich. Now, Mayweather was already rich, but it brought Conor McGregor into a sphere of wealth beyond touchability, if you like.
Yeah.
It was very shortly after that period of time that his recent court case, you know, the one that ended with Nikita Hand, it was very shortly after that period where all his dreams came true. And then suddenly, I'm not going to go into the details of what happened there, but the civil case, he was found guilty of assault. My mind doesn't get drawn to the, you know, that. It gets drawn to asking the question, was there a certain element of the shadow that manifests that scenario?
Well, there'd be a bit of what I would call unmanageability in his life, probably. You know, because of fame, because of, you know, money, because of things. That's understandable. What age is he?
Oh, he's young. Like, he's not 40 anyway.
There you go. Well, he's a very young man,
Yeah.
by today's standards. I'm thinking about certain people. I mean, I'm thinking of David Bowie. If you think of Bowie in the 70s, he was a complete flick. He was druggy. He was out of his head, off his face most of the time. He was, I remember that famous thing outside Victoria Station in London where he did the Nazi salute going in this open-top car, you know, and he got into big, big trouble, right? Cut to the 90s. There was that kind of middle, the 80s was all kind of pop and kind of concerts, and he was kind of nothing. He didn't really produce any great music in the 80s. Yeah, after the 70s, after the albums in Berlin, that was the end, and then there was kind of empty feel. And then he came back in the 90s as this like extraordinary figure, completely sober, completely smart, completely wise, completely stable. He found a new wife who was not crazy, like his first one. And he suddenly became this extraordinary, like, responsible figure in popular culture. And I don't think there's another one like him. Maybe Dylan is the kind of closest equivalent you can see in a different way. But Bowie was just so solid. And so what I'm saying is that, you know, this is something that, of course, you're not permitted to have. It is the right to be young and crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody, you know, so you know, I think McGregor probably has the potential to be a very, very significant.
And the point is, I wouldn't even talk about it other than the fact you've made this new manifestation for yourself, which is to be the president of Ireland, which involves you in something.
Yeah. But what is more impressive than that is his passion for Ireland.
Yeah, yeah, you can't deny that.
No. It's real. Yeah. It's absolutely real. That minute or whatever it was in the White House, he calmed so much, even though you could see he was nervous, but it didn't stop him saying what needed to be said.
And it didn't, like, to be fair, like, it didn't stop him saying what needed to be said, and he knew exactly the track. Whatever about that court case, it was done, was put to bed. Now, I think he's appealing it if the media is reporting right. He knew that's where all of the hate, all of the vitriol was going to go immediately for that.
He did, yeah.
So it's not like he didn't know that in advance. Despite your wounds and everybody knowing what they are, you still said the thing that needed to be said, that nobody else would say.
It's the way you handle things, more than anything, that matters, because people know what themselves are like. They know there's stuff in their own past that is kind of a bit, you know, they wouldn't necessarily be proud of, and so on and so on. So they make allowances. They mightn't articulate that because in a certain in a kind of a society like we've generated, which is full of piety and sanctimony and all kind of bullshit, they're not going to say, you know, well, I can, you know, identify with some aspect of what McGregor went through or what he did or whatever happened. In Ireland, there's always was this quality that people if they saw you sticking to your guns, if they saw you being consistent, they give you credit for that, regardless of what else had happened, like, you know. And that's something I think that, you know, in time, I think McGregor might well mature. You see, here's the point. If Ireland is to get out of the situation it's now in, we need to get rid of the entire political establishment as it stands. We need rid of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, all those organisations. Now, I don't know how that's going to happen, but
well, one point on how it might happen, and this, I don't have all the detail on this, but I did notice in the last few days a Fine Gael councillor was kicked out of the party who was from, I would assume, the recent immigrants into the country, because she said something about, I don't know, she made some comment about Israel or Jews or something like that. The comment was out of line with acceptable conversation. The only reason she was picked was because of tokenism.
Yeah.
So that tokenism backfired within less than a year. So there might be a hope in that. Like, you know, these people that the government tell us that we need to be compassionate, you know, we need to open our hearts and our homes and our land to, the reveal is the government actually don't give two flying
well,
fucks
yeah,
about them.
this is axiomatic, really. You know, like, really, do you look at Micheál Martin or Simon Harris or Leo Varadkar or Pascal Donoghue and say, he is a compassionate man? Really? Seriously? You know, he is trying to fill the pockets of his mates with fake money. He's enriching his friends. These guys, that's what they're doing in their context. That's their priority.
And they want to feel great about it.
Yeah.
They want to feel great about the trick.
Yeah.
Like it's not...
Where's your manager? Where's your manager? Yeah. Well, you know, like as if they're doing it out of their humanity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just so appalling. Like I actually sometimes like wake up in the middle of the night and I lie there thinking about these guys, and I kind of, how did we end up with these guys running our country? Like, you kind of think that the people running your country should be kind of, not necessarily the best or the brightest of the best, but they're kind of, you think they're going to be up there, the top tier of intelligence, and you look at these guys, like, and you think, like, okay, I've grown up in this country, I met hundreds and thousands of people, maybe, I don't know, and lots of great people, very smart people, very nice people, very decent people, very intelligent people, very, you know, cultured people. None of them got to be Taoiseach, but Simon Harris did. Can you explain that to me?
Well, if you designed a system guaranteed to get the worst people into that job, you design the one we probably have at the moment.
Like, you just think about this. On the one hand, we have Sean Lemass. On the other hand, we have Simon Harris. What? What went wrong?
Well, but we all have to take a certain ownership of that. It's almost like we need to have a national AA meeting.
Yeah.
To stand up and say, hi, my name's Jerry. I totally disrespected the country.
Yes. Yes.
By my actions. And here's how I did it.
Yeah, and I need to make amends.
And I need to make amends for it.
Yeah, all of us. All of us.
All of us together in some...
in some way we all did, because if you think about it, if you start to sit down and think about it like that, even though you mightn't have voted for any of these people, I probably wrote articles about Fine Gael from time to time that weren't absolute hatchet jobs, right? And that was wrong. I realised that was a crime against humanity, not to actually call these guys out as the scum they are. There's no excuse for not seeing that now. The problem was that it kind of crept up on us. And, you know, there was this kind of decremental quality of public representative where you went from Lemass. You didn't go straight from Lemass to Simon Harris. You kind of went down a kind of a stair, step after step. And then you end up with this, right? And God knows there may even be worse to follow. Now, it's hard to imagine.
There could be worse to follow, but I suppose...
It's hard.
But if we go back to the poster boy of corruption when I was a kid, Charlie Haughey, And he was, when you look back on him now, he's an understandable, almost nostalgic feeling for that type of corruption, if we could only get it back.
Yeah.
But it was that corruption that ricocheted into, you had to be whiter than white to be a politician.
I'm not saying this to make any excuses for Haughey, because he had a certain sort of attitude to money, that he believed that when he was, as he thought, the King of Ireland, right, that you needed a decent house. And therefore, because Mitterrand would be coming to visit, and might, you have to give him up, put him up in the spare room, and, you needed to put on a decent show. Like, he actually thought like that. The problem with it is that when you start opening the door to corruption, it comes in. And one of the things that happened, I've said this repeatedly, if you remember the time, maybe about 25 years ago, when all these tribunals started, the beef tribunal, and all the papers are full of it, terrible, boring stuff, like dreadful stuff, awful. But the whole point of that, I remember having this hunch one day, and I suddenly go, what is this all about? And I realised what it really was about was, if you get a reputation for getting up early in the morning,
you can stay in bed all day.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing. If you can get a reputation as a country for having zero tolerance of corruption, you can get on with corruption like you've never in your wildest dreams.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. We created this sort of smoke screen of righteousness.
Yeah.
And then, oh no, we're the zero tolerance at 500 quid bung for the planning permission or the rezoning thing. Oh yeah, drag him before the tribunal, give him a whipping, banish him from public life, blah, blah. But meanwhile, they were bringing in the real dirty troops.
A gangster would have understood what they were doing, whereas an ideologue would be ushering them in the door.
Yeah, yeah.
The rough translation of the word Taoiseach is chieftain.
Yeah.
Well, Haughey was a chieftain.
Yes, he was.
He wasn't, that's not to say good, bad or indifferent, but he was a recognisably Irish chieftain, whereas we haven't really had any chieftain. We decided, because he was a shadowy chieftain, we were abandoning having chieftains, because I don't know that we've had one since.
Yeah, you see, this is Haughey, even though I've said something about him there which is only half the truth about him, this idea that he wanted to put on this show of opulence for the French, so that they would see that we were a noble people, But he was, by the same token, the very same Haughey would be aware, and was aware, that you didn't want to, for your indigenous population, to be too showy in that way. I remember one time, I was out in his house in the morning, early in the morning, to get some photographs taken for a magazine thing we were doing about him. I was taking him around outside, and there was trees, and standing in front of trees, and click, 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 and click, 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 and he would say, oh, hold on a moment, I'll do something very interesting in a moment. And he'd go, and this sort of stuff. It was very funny. But I said to him, Mr. Haughey, I said, would you mind doing one in front of your house at the front door?
No.
Oh. Too much Georgian elegance. You see? So he was a very clever man in lots of ways.
Yeah, he wanted the Georgian elegance, but he didn't want people to know that he wanted the Georgian elegance.
Yeah, for internal consumption, from the guys, the Fianna Fáil voter with the deep caps, who adored him.
Yeah,
you talk about Trump.
I
it's
remember
the same thing. Idolatry. About idolatry. Trump was in the hippie place.
I remember the Garrett Haughey. That year we had the 2 or 3 elections in the same year. I remember Haughey coming to Milltown, and it was like the Queen was coming. It was like, or the Pope was coming, better.
Yeah.
It was like, well, I grew up in a Fine Gael house, but Fine Gaelers back then were proud of being Fine Gael, and they were a bit too loud about it. And my father was like quiet, never said who he voted for, and he was definitely Fianna Fáil, like.
Yeah. You see, this is the paradox of Fianna Fáil. See, this is why it's so interesting and so complex. And there's a point I want to make about that in a minute. But I want to just, where my father came from, down in Maharao in Sligo, where we go all the time, except for my wife, and my daughter lives there. And there's a house down at the beach, which we call Haughey's house. And the reason for that is it was owned by Charles Haughey. And he never came there as far as I have ever been able to ascertain, but his family did. His sons and daughters and his wife and his mother. But that house was given to him in his will by an old man who never met him.
Yeah.
He just adored him. Yeah. And he had nobody else to leave his house to, and he left it to
It's like the way they used to leave it to the church long ago,
you
know.
And
it helped with his legend as well.
For the last 5 years, I've been haunted by this. We're talking here about the culture of politics, and I wrote books about this in the way back 25, 30 years ago. In a certain sense, revering and celebrating this culture for all its flaws and weaknesses and so on. But now I look back and thought, was that some kind of an excess of innocence? Given what's happened now in the last 5 years, given the cruelty that these people have shown to our people, given the abuse that they've heaped upon our people's heads, the mistreatment of their country, the stealing of their country, the absolute destruction of their country, I think I look back on any kind of lightheartedness, any kind of frivolity I might have felt, any kind of understanding I might have felt for the weaknesses of the venality of politicians at a minor level was probably misplaced.
There's been an unaddressed shadow, collective shadow, that the church tried to fill. Let's put it this way, the church didn't help us address. And we got rid of that. We had politics. Because that shadow never was addressed, that kind of almost romanticism of really low-level kind of corruption, when we think of what's going on in the wider world today, it was a path that brought us to where we are today. We have to figure that out.
Yeah, see, I remember, I can't remember who said this, but it is an essay I read one time, and one of the lines was that all economies, all cultures require about 15% corruption to function properly, particularly economies, that you need a black economy as part of that, right? And I think there's something in that. And that's what we're kind of talking about, that, the kind of the backhander, or, the dropsy here and there, doesn't really do any harm, other than that it might actually encourage other people to. And that's what kind of happened, I suppose, in part. And this is the extraordinary thing, that in this period that we've had now, the most grotesque corruption that we've ever seen, those of us who can see it, most people can't see it. They don't know what's happening. Yeah. Because why? Because the press is the most corrupt of all.
Yeah.
The press, who are the sentries on our democracy, on our freedom, on our rights, on our constitution.
And I think that is actually what's collapsing at the moment. I've probably said it a number of times over the last 2 years, where I thought we're at we're close to a moment of almost a tsunami moment. What resonates with me in going around is that it's that collapse of any faith in, like yesterday, RTE are bringing out like some platform called Clarity, I think it's called, to inform the public about misinformation and disinformation, the threat of it, okay? And so what are we doing? A state-funded entity is creating another state-funded entity to distract us away from the corruption that the state-funded entity has been engaged in.
The chief source of misinformation in this society is RTE.
So,
They're the champions. They're like the Manchester United of misinformation. Nobody else gets a look at.
Yeah.
This is the trick all the time. It's the misdirection. It's Tommy Cooper stuff,
But it's that,
you have to watch both hands.
And that signals to me the media is very close to a collapse point, because so much effort now is going into trying to keep the attention on them. Not necessarily that they're getting it from, my Substack or your writing or anybody else. The scores of people giving information out on huge platforms in Ireland, from the young to the old.
Yes, that's right. And there's also word of mouth that we're not aware of, or there's no way of monitoring or checking it. But certainly, I can't quantify it, but I can certainly say that in the last 5 years, things have changed dramatically. Sitting outside in the sun the other day on the famous 2nd of April, and beautiful sunny morning, and there's about 6 or 8 tables there, and there's people at everyone. So I was kind of more or less in the middle, so I could hear everything. virtually every conversation was about Donald Trump. And they were all kind of cheap jokes. You know, orange man, that orange-faced guy in the White House, and that guy Vance, and then well, I have to go to Clare in the afternoon. Oh yeah, you're going to Doonbeg. Don't forget to add a tariff. This sort of stuff. And it's like you think these people, like, they're everything. They're taking the feed every day still from RTE.
I don't think it's given them any sustenance.
It's not.
Because you can't even ask a simple question about the thing that they're laughing about.
They're missing out so much.
Yeah,
like, the story is so much more interesting than that.
Yeah.
And so much more hopeful, actually.
And it's not clear. It's not black or white.
No, it's not. No. We like, I don't think we or you or me would ever say that we're Trump partisans or anything like that. But we're interested in the phenomenon, and we think it has potential for good. Whereas Simon Harris has minus quantity of potential for good in political terms. I don't, maybe a wonderful man in his family life, etc., but he's an appalling specimen in political life. So is Micheál Martin, so is Radker, so is Pascal Donoghue, so is Alan McEntee. Every single one of them. We need a shot of them. And we need to start again from somewhere else. Now, I don't just say that Conor McGregor is the only option. There are lots of other...
He could be the trigger point for...
To open up possibilities that were not considered before. Because I've always said there are a lot of great people out there.
Absolutely.
And they just wouldn't be the kind of people who would ever think of themselves as being in politics. But I would be saying so now, well, it's time to start thinking it, because you might be the person who could make a difference.
Yeah.